Yes, as human beings, sometimes we all get tired from the hustle and bustle of life. But if you begin to look at the things, the elementary disciplines and principles that build your relationship with God as a chore, you start to slowly fall into this slave mentality. Oh, it's time for Bible study. Oh, it's time to pray again. Oh, it's time to worship. These things are not a punishment.
Right.
These are elementary disciplines that connect you to God and assist you as you build a closer, intimate, and personal relationship with God. And it is that relationship that you bring amongst the community of saints. So you connect your faith with their faith and their faith and their faith. So as you begin to activate the corporate anointing, you flow from a place of the personal relationship that you've already developed.
That's right.
With this understanding, it's very easy to realize the importance of why you need to pray, of why you need to read, of why you need to worship. These things connect you with God, and thus it gives you a greater and deeper connection with those He has set around you. But let's look at this again. And it says, but you have received a spirit of adoption as sons and daughters. And then it goes on to say in verse 16, the Spirit Himself testifies with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, heirs, also heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ. So understand that now your identity is changing to now being a son or daughter of God. And now you're also an heir. And now you are also either glorified with Him, or you're going through the process of suffering so you can be glorified along with Him. So with this understanding, it begins to change how you view yourself, and it begins to change the connection of those around you who you refer to as kin. See, because now you're being classified as a son or daughter of God. They're not. You're being classified as an heir of God and a fellow heir of Jesus Christ. They're not. You're being classified as one going through the process of suffering so that you can be glorified along with Christ. They're not. You see the difference here? You see where that struggle, where that process is, where the turmoil, the turbulence comes when it comes in your walk with Christ. Understand this. I don't want to get too deep into psychology tonight, but there is a process and an understanding. It is believed that many people begin to resist the change in your life because they see themselves through a reflection of you. So if you're changing and they're not, they begin to internalize it as something's wrong with them, and they become angry with your change because as you begin to change and develop, they no longer can see themselves in you. Let me say this again. Some people are angry with you because you're starting to look more like God and you're starting to look less like them. So the frustration that is happening has nothing to do with your walk with God. It has nothing to do with your development. It has nothing to do with you answering your call. Honestly, they would be happier if you went and sat at the church up the street all day long, never grew, never changed, never learned how to cast out devils, never learned how to prophesy or work miracles. Because as long as you still looked like them and they could identify with a piece of you, they were okay. But the moment you started to look like God, the moment His Spirit started to testify with your spirit that you were a son or daughter of God, the moment you now become a fellow heir with Christ, the moment now you are being qualified to be glorified along with Christ, you no longer look like them. And that is where the issue is.
Come on, that's it.
That's where the issue is. Something's wrong. What is it with all this church stuff? Now all of a sudden you look like this. Oh, all of a sudden you're acting brand new. No, you're starting to conduct yourself like a son or daughter of God. You're being led by the Spirit now, as opposed to previously when you were led by your own flesh. Now you are a fellow heir. Now you are being glorified. Your actions, your conduct, your speech, your habits, your hobbies, your whereabouts, your connections are different from when you were led by the flesh.
That's right.
You're no longer governed by the same thing that they're governed by. You're no longer being led by the same things that they're being led by. You now have access to a realm, to a place, to a seat, to inheritance that they don't have access to. My God, today.
Come on.
And that is where the issue comes in.
That's right.
But understand, in this place of turmoil, in this place of spiritual tug of war between who you used to be and who you're becoming, understand there becomes a breaking of bonds so that you can form new connections and graft these new bonds with those who are now fellow sons and daughters, fellow co-heirs, and going through the process to be fellow glorified alongside you. Many people fail, my God, today, at this part right here. They fail at this part right here. You know, and this, Apostle, is why I wrote the family test. Because I recognize that when people first take up this call, this assignment on their life, their greatest opposition becomes those of their household, those of their natural kin.
It's your greatest enemies, Jesus said.
But understand that in this place, you are forming new bonds.
That's right.
Understand this. When you think about, you know, trees and plants, when they're trying to save one that's dying and they're trying to attach it to another one, don't you know, Apostle, now there's many different ways to do this, but one of the ways they do this is they take that living part, because the rest of what it's connected to is dead or on its way to be dead. They cut that off and they put it in some water and they preserve it. Then they go to this bigger, stronger living plant and they make an incision. They cut it. Then they take this other little piece that they're going to transplant and they stick it in that incision, and then they bind it together and they keep it bound together until it's completely fused to the point where you almost couldn't even tell it was a separate plant. This is what happens in the spirit when you now begin to make these kinship bonds and you become a joint supplying to the household of faith that you're a part of. Now you have bonded so close to these sons and daughters of God, to these fellow heirs, to these fellow glorified individuals, that we can no longer tell that you used to be a part of something else. It's almost like you had been there the entire time.
Wow.
But see, you know what, Apostle? It is in this phase that the cares of life start to bring turbulence in people's lives long enough to try to disrupt this process of bonding. This is the time where it seems like you have all these family troubles and quarrels. It seems like you've got all this school and work pressure and stress. You got things going on with your children. You got things going on with these non-marital relationships you shouldn't be involved in. All this excess stuff in life coming to trouble the waters of your foundation, of your peace, long enough to disrupt this process of engrafting. This actually is the time where you should be the most consecrated, the most set aside, the most off social media, the most in your word, the most in prayer, the most surrounded by those that God has connected you to. Why? Because this is a unique, this is a delicate, this is a holy process that isn't to be disturbed. This is why it's a good thing when you first join somewhere, you first join a tribe, you connect with your spiritual family, whatever terminology it is that you use, you need to be set apart. You don't need to be making too many moves. You don't need to be involved in too much other stuff. I'm telling you, by the Spirit of God, it is a distraction. It's a distraction from the enemy to disrupt this engraftment process. Because if you're still tied on, but you haven't fully grafted in, then soon as the wind, the rain, the storm, the warfare, whatever it is that comes, you're just going to fall right off because you didn't finish engrafting and making a strong kinship bond to the tribe, to the family that God has placed you in.
That's right.
And understand, during this time, you're going to receive a lot of opposition. But see, there's a few things that are key in this process here. First, you've got to be okay with setting other things in your life aside. It comes with prioritizing. Prioritizing. This now means that what? The things of God have to be prioritized to take precedent in your life over everything else. They have to be prioritized. And see, this is where the conflict comes in, not only externally, but internally. For some people, oh, well, I'm going to school. I'm doing this. I'm working 3 jobs. I'm doing it. I made a commitment to do this. I made a commitment to do that. And here's what you have to do. Here's the litmus test. Of all of the things that you're doing, hold them up and say, okay, did this come from when I was being led by the Spirit of God or while I was still being led by my flesh?
Come on.
And when you do this type of test and this analysis, you will see that some of the things that you have to let go of are things that you instituted among yourself as you were being led by your flesh. Some of the things that are holding us up, some of the things that are distracting us from deeper levels of discipleship, that are distracting us from being glorified, from becoming co-heirs, are things that God had nothing to do with in the first place. Now, Apostle, I want to pass this over to you for a minute to talk about this place, because we've met several people in different phases of their life, and it seemed as though they were just gridlocked and weren't able to do the will of God, or not to the extent that he had pressed upon them because of this phase of life, of having all these other things going on.